Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So today I'm going to show you how to run Amiga games on your RG351 devices. Now the Amiga 500 was a system that came out in the late 80s and early 90s made by Commodore. And it was fairly popular in the United States, but it was much more popular overseas. And for months I've been getting requests on how to make this system work, because even though it is a fairly simple computer system, it is very complicated to get started on handheld devices. And a lot of that has to do with the BIOS files, which are called Kickstart files. And so a couple weeks ago I dug in and started trying to research the best way to get these games to play. And it's complicated, it took me a while to figure all this out, and what I ended up doing is basically taking a carpet bombing approach, where I just took a bunch of files that I heard worked, put them all together into one package, and then threw it all on my RG351P, and sure enough, just about every single game works this way. So today I'm going to show off all the different types of Kickstart files that I recommend, and then we'll also get into some gameplay as well. So without any further ado, let's get into it. So the most important aspect of this video is to not watch this video. You actually just need to go to my website and read all about all the various things involved with getting these BIOS files started. There are a couple different ways you can get these Kickstart files. You can actually just buy them from the current license holder for Amiga, or if you have an Amiga computer, there's a method to get your Kickstart files from that as well. At the end of the day, the most important thing you have to do is find these files, and you need to name them appropriately. And I've left all of the specific names here in this guide. And to further complicate things, because there are two different emulators at work, you have to have two different file names as well. And some of these are actually the same files, you just have to copy them and then rename them. And finally, there are a few files that are called RTB or relocation files that I've heard are also very helpful. Like I mentioned earlier, this is kind of a carpet bombing approach. We're going to take a bunch of files that probably work and put them all together so that way your system definitely works. To summarize everything up, I have this one list here that shows every single Kickstart ROM that I recommend. The ones that are bolded are the ones that I say you definitely need to have. I think if you only got the bolded ones, about 60% of the games would work right out of the box. But if you got all of the files, then almost all of the games are going to work for you. Now let's talk about file types, because that's also very important. There are various files you can use for Amiga games. And if you look at the RetroArch documents, you can see that they support a lot of different file types. But I found that the LHA file type from WHD Load are the most compatible, and they also are the fastest loading. So I would get game files that have that extension. And I realized the most popular ones are ADF and HDF, and those are also supported, but to be honest, I couldn't get HDF file types to work. So I'm going to show off everything in ArkOS, but this also applies to 351 Elec. Now there are two different emulators that you're going to use to run Amiga games. There's a standalone emulator and there's one that's a RetroArch core. By default in ArkOS, the standalone is the default emulator. So if you go into the emulator's options, you can see that you can choose between the standalone and the RetroArch versions. And if you keep it at auto, it's going to default to that standalone emulator. But if you prefer the RetroArch core, and many people do, then you can just go ahead and change it right then and there, and then every single game is going to open up with RetroArch instead. So I'm going to boot up a game here, and I'm just going to let it run in real time so you can see how long it takes to load up a game. Because it's a little bit longer than you might expect. And just to emphasize here, I'm running an LHA file type, which are some of the fastest to load. They're also the most compressed, which makes them very handy. Okay, so there we are, we're in the game. In general, a lot of the games on the Amiga are actually very simple, and all you really need are the A and the B buttons. Okay, so here we're running this game with the standalone emulator. And you might be able to notice just from the gameplay itself, but it's running a little bit slow. I'm having a hard time playing this game because of the lag that's involved. Not only that, I'm definitely detecting some stuttering in the sound as well. So let's try out the RetroArch version and see if there's any difference here. Along the way, I'll show you how to configure the system so that way you can set it for a per game basis. Okay, so back in the main menu, just hit select and then go down to edit this game's metadata. And in here you'll see a section that says emulator, and here just change it to RetroArch, and then go down to the bottom and hit save. And there you go. Now it's going to, for this game in particular, open up using the RetroArch core. Now I'm going to let this one run in real time as well, just so you can get a feel of how long the loading is with this as well. What I've noticed is that the RetroArch core definitely takes a lot longer to load than the standalone emulator. One nice thing about the RetroArch core is if you hit select, it brings up an on-screen keyboard, which is very handy. Okay, so there we are. The wait wasn't too bad, but that's how long it takes. Now, getting back into the game, you can see it runs a lot more smoothly. I'm not having any audio issues, and I'm not having any lag either. And because we're using a RetroArch core, I can actually show the frames per second, and you can see here it's running at about 50 frames per second. It's actually playing really well. One other thing I noticed with a standalone emulator is that I couldn't get the mouse function to work. Now there's an entire menu for this system. If you hit select and the X button, it'll actually pull up a menu and you can do all sorts of fiddling with the configuration, but right out of the box, I couldn't get the mouse to work at all. That's not to say that it's impossible, but I just wasn't able to figure it out in the first few minutes I was testing this. But by comparison, using the RetroArch core, the mouse worked with the right analog stick right out the gate. And then L2 works as the mouse click button. Now, I'm not familiar with the Amiga at all. I actually have never played this system before, didn't have it growing up or anything else like that. And so what I did is I went on YouTube and I asked people in my community tab what games they recommended me test out. And so for the rest of the video, I'm just going to show off a bunch of games that people recommended to me. I was really surprised by the amount of comments that I got about these games. People really love this system. I never had the opportunity to try it out, but I hope you guys enjoy seeing some of this footage. Admittedly, because I've never played any of these games before, some of them I couldn't figure out how to get working. So for example, this Frontier game, all I could really figure out is how to blow up my own spaceship. That was the only thing I was actually successful with. But a couple of them I was able to figure out pretty quickly. Like this game, Pang, is actually kind of neat. You have to hit these balls and they become smaller balls, and then I learned that you don't let the balls touch you at all or else you're going to get killed. But it's a pretty fun game. And then I tried out this game called Project X, and this is just a side-scrolling shooter, but somehow I'm like the worst ever at this game. Like I just died like 10 times in a row, and that was basically it for me. And it's funny because somewhere out there, somebody knows this game by heart, right? Like they can just play this game with their eyes closed. And for me, I couldn't even make it 15 seconds without dying. It's pretty funny. Probably one of the most requested games is this game here called Sensible World of Soccer. And I really didn't know what to expect when I first turned it on, but I found it so funny. Like the game runs so smoothly and nicely, but the characters are so tiny, like the little sprites or whatever, but it's just kind of comical to me. But honestly, the game runs really well, and it was actually a lot of fun to play. Yes, even as an American, I do enjoy soccer from time to time. And although nobody asked for it, I'm sure somebody out there is wondering if Shaq Fu plays very well on the Amiga, and honestly, it played pretty good. And so Shaquille O'Neal, if you're actually watching this video, and you might, we never know, this is actually a pretty good way to play your game called Shaq Fu. Or, you know, just don't play this game because it's terrible. Now, probably the second most requested game that I got was this game here, Speedball 2. And it seemed like kind of a mix of football and hockey or something like that. It seemed kind of fun. It reminded me of like Mutant League Football or something like that. Now this game called Super Frog is a 2D platformer. Now I found this one really interesting because honestly, jumping into this game that's probably almost 30 years old at this point, I really had no idea what I was doing. And it's just kind of this weird time capsule. You have to figure out what are the things that are going to kill me? What are my friends? Like, it's just kind of a weird experience. You know, we all play Mario and we all feel like we naturally know what we're supposed to do. But in this game, I had no clue. And honestly, that's part of the fun of this. Now, another game that people really love is this Turrican 2 game. Now, I remember this game vaguely because I think there was like a Super Turrican on like Genesis or Super Nintendo or something like that. So I vaguely remember this game and it looks familiar. But what I heard most people saying is that they love the soundtrack of this game. So I kind of listened to it for a bit and I just want to report that it does sound good in terms of that there's no like audio crackling or anything else like that. So if you really dig the music and the soundtrack of this game, you're probably going to enjoy this. Now this game's called WizKid, and I think it's kind of a mix of like a puzzle game and maybe a little bit of an action game. Honestly, I never really got past the tutorial, but it seems really kind of interesting, and I like these kind of weird and far out games like this. I mean, it's not very often you get to be the head of a frog, I think, and then hit blocks which then kill bugs. I mean, it's kind of a big deal. Okay, this game called Xenon 2 Mega Blast. It started out really slow for me, but then I learned as I got more power-ups, my ship got a little bit faster. So I'm not really sure if this was just natural slowdown from the game, or if it's supposed to be this slow. Okay, so in addition to Amiga 500 games, there are also these games called Amiga CD32, and this is a later platform, but it runs on that same RetroArch emulator. And luckily, all those Kickstart ROMs that I mentioned before, they all also enable you to play CD32 games. So you don't need to do any extra work or anything else like that, just make sure you put all those Kickstart files into your BIOS folder on your SD card. In general, I didn't see much of a difference between the Amiga 500 and the CD32 games. I think the CD32 probably has a little bit better sound, and some of the graphics were a little better too, but overall they seemed very similar to me. And when using that LHA file extension, the file size is still relatively small, just maybe 5 or 6 megabytes. So I tried out some other games on the Amiga CD32 that I'd already tried on the Amiga 500, for example this Frontier game. And I really didn't notice any sort of difference between the graphics and the sound, at least on my little 3.5-inch screen here. But I'm sure people who really love Amiga and know a lot about it can tell me all the differences, and I encourage you to do that in the comments below. But yeah, overall, it was kind of a neat experience to try out these games that really were never part of my own history, but it's kind of fun because I know a lot of people probably have really great memories about these games. And hopefully this guide, which will show you how to get all of those Kickstart ROMs in order, will allow you to play all of your favorite classics from the 80s and 90s. Alright everyone, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it helpful, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.